Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Karen Wills. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Investor Relations here at Strategikon, and I wanted to welcome you all to our webinar, Mastering Clinical Vendor Evaluation for Superior Trial Outcomes. We have a stellar lineup for you of our panelists, and I know they're all very excited to share their thoughts and things with you. So let me rush through some of the early items so that we can get onto the panel. First of all, we'd like to make you aware that we're actually going to do another webinar in June 20th called Benchmarking Brilliance, Navigating CRO Costs and Data-Driven Decisions. This will be another unique format that we roll out, which we will be answering a number of common questions that we get from you, our customers, and people that are interested in this in our system. So, for example, things like, I lost all my questions here, you guys. Is that how does Clinical Maestro deal with inflation, or how does Clinical Maestro deal with therapeutic areas, or how is Clinical Maestro different from Clear Trial? All of these types of things will be answered, and we will be sending you out some information. And if you have other questions, we'll actually be soliciting them from you as well. So look forward to getting that invite. Secondly, if you have any questions, put them in the question tab of your control panel for the webinar, and I'll be monitoring that, and we'll be pushing them out to the panelists throughout the webinar. And then lastly, don't forget to check out the materials that we've made available for the webinar, including the link to our vendor management or category management survey. Would really like your input on that, and we'd be happy to send you all the results once we get those all compiled. So with that, let me introduce Strategikon CEO, Anca Copaescu, who is the powerhouse, there's no other way of saying it, behind Strategikon's success and the driving force behind the Clinical Maestro platform. With over 15 years of experience in the clinical research industry, her expertise in clinical outsourcing and analytics is pretty much second to none. As head of clinical outsourcing and analytics at BioMarin, she managed the company's global outsourcing and vendor management and clinical analytics functions. So with that, I'm now going to pass it over to Anca to take the panel. Anca, over to you.
Thank you so much. Second to none, I wouldn't say, because I think this panel right here has more experience than me in outsourcing. So I will let them tell you that one by one. Thank you so much for joining. Let's meet the panelists quickly. Kara, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to be ladies first, so Brenda, you're next.
Well, thank you, Anca. Very nice to meet everyone today. I'm excited to be here and share my perspectives with you. My name is Kara Titus. I've been in the industry about 20 years now, the last 14 of which have been focused in clinical vendor management, oversight, procurement. So I'm excited to share that perspective with you today, and look forward to having the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Welcome. Brenda, you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Medina. I am currently the Global Head of Clinical Business Operations at Kyowa Kirin, where my responsibilities are all around vendor, budget, contract management, as well as site and budget management and clinical systems. I'm responsible to build a team, processes, and all the tools around that. And I've done that similar role now in 5 different organizations. I had the pleasure of doing that with Anca at BioMarin. And I'm very excited to actually contribute my 20+ years of experience, which I can't believe I have, in this exact forum. So I'm honored to be here and share my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I'm going to go to you, Scott, next.
Thank you, Anca. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Scott Sawicki. I'm currently an independent consultant contractor. I've been in the industry. This September will be 30 years. Seems longer than that or shorter than that, as time certainly does fly by. I've spent my time on the sponsor side as well as the CRO side, but the majority of my experience has been on the sponsor side, specifically in outsourcing and procurement.
Thank you so much, Scott. And last but not least, you, Rob.
Thanks, Anca. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, hi, I'm Rob Aitchison. I'm head of outsourcing advisory at a consultancy company called 4C Associates Limited. But my background is pure industry. So well over 25 years. I'm not sure I've hit 30 yet, and I kind of stopped counting at the moment. So about over 25 years experience in the industry, predominantly in business-to-business facing roles between CROs, clinical development organizations, and sponsors. Although I have got some experience in product development as well in the pharm sci arena, having worked with companies like Pfizer and Novartis, but and mid-sized companies like Ono Pharma as well. So hopefully I'll be able to provide a perspective across the whole range of different size of pharma companies. So really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Rob. I would say between the five of us, we've all journeyed both on the sponsor side and the service provider side. We don't have a CRO with us today or a vendor, but I think all of us through our collective experience can bring that angle as well, which is important for the industry overall. So I'm going to get us started. We only have 4 questions and a poll for the audience. So just to get you warm, I wanted to start by talking about category management and category strategy. This is a word that you don't hear within the biotech environment. And I think Scott pointed that out to me, and I quite honestly have not seen it much in the biotech world, because smaller companies tend to outsource everything to the CRO. So technically the CRO is doing the category management on their behalf. Other companies are in transition and they want to establish category management. They want to bring services in-house, and sometimes they think of that as just owning multiple categories and creating the buckets for central labs, for CROs, and putting a preferred provider model in place. Other companies go even further and they think about performance at the category level and governance that is category specific. And as we were discussing during our prep session, category management, it's not the same as outsourcing. Category strategy is not the same as outsourcing strategy, but the two are closely related. So I'm going to start by asking the panel the question, what is category management to you? Why is that important? How should we think about it in terms of bringing efficiencies in the sponsor organization? And maybe what are the pain points associated with it? So I'm going to start again with ladies first. So Chiara, you're first on my screen. I'm sorry, you're going to get the first question, but next time I'll start from the other corner.
That sounds good. Thanks, Anca. And I think to your point, Anca, category management, whether you're a small organization or large organization, which Scott will talk about here in a minute, but I think it's important for different reasons for different organizations. And, whatever that may be, I think from my perspective, one of the things that's most important to know is the ability to gain that buy-in from your stakeholders that you're engaging with and participating in this exercise, right? So working with them to talk through what's important, what are we looking to accomplish, what are the strategic objectives, what are the operational objectives we're trying to get out of this. So that way we have that alignment, right? And I think without that alignment, any category strategy is not going to be as successful as it could be. And so I do think, how do you engage with those stakeholders? How do you gain their feedback and make them feel a part of that journey and a part of that process so that buy-in is there? And it's finding that balance with the flexibility of a category strategy, again, to make it successful, right? So especially, I work at Dragonfly Therapeutics. And so it's a small biotech organization, and we're just starting to hit that critical threshold now where we have the volume to have more leverage, or we have that volume to consolidate and think about how do we most efficiently maximize our sourcing, and how do we give that flexibility to those teams so they don't feel locked into a certain provider that maybe isn't performing or a strategy that isn't matching their needs. So it's really finding that fine balance, Anca.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. What is your perspective, Scott, coming from most recently from a small dynamic biotech, but having had the experience in top pharma companies that do a lot of it versus doing very little of it? What's your perspective on the importance or even the pain points associated with it? It's not always easy.
Yeah, again, time is limited here, so loaded question, right? I guess I'll say when at the small biotech, in my most recent experience, it was more about having a sourcing strategy per se, not a category strategy, because quite simply the spend is not there, and you know, we don't have the volume. We did not have the volume of work to kind of segment and separate things into certain categories. My experiences before that at a large pharma was the complete opposite. We had hundreds of millions of dollars of spend. We had category managers managing each of the different categories. But again, I think it's as companies evolve, right? Starting at a startup company in a biotech, you kind of evolve. It's almost like you know, a child going through school. I would say the biotechs are more perhaps adolescents, small children, adolescents going into grammar school, whereas the large pharma are, you know, graduating high school, or mid-sized pharma may be graduating high school, and then the large pharma are in universities or getting their doctorate or their MBAs and things like that, where it becomes much more advanced. Little bit of a culture shock for me, so I had to kind of remove the category management, millions of dollars spend, and then kind of just ask and work with the business. What is it that we want? You know, what is the strategy that we want to implement, if we want to have a strategy, or is it just, are we going to do tactical, you know, one-offs here and there? So that's kind of, you know, playing both sides of the perspective in the recent experience I had at the biotech.
Thank you so much, Scott. Brenda, I know you are about to embark on the category management implementation journey. And probably what Scott said resonates, but also on the buy-in, getting the stakeholders to, internal stakeholders to actually approve, essentially increasing your sourcing department, because that's one of the components that's needed to implement category strategy, or to buy in a preferred provider program versus outsourcing everything to the CRO. What is your perspective?
So,
not only in the current role, but also having journeyed on this in the past.
yes. So, you know, one of my angles has always been technology, right? I'm really big in the industry. I'm looking at what could help me to solve this category, what data could help me to actually implement this. Sometimes education of what really is happening within an organization is probably the key to getting these conversations started. So, you know, it is, at least where I come in small to mid-sized pharma and most of the organizations, that data is lacking to surface. So that's usually where I start. It's like, what is our spend? What is our, you know, what is important to us? What impacts our portfolio? What is actually important from a service provider perspective? What impacts, you know, so if you start answering those tactical questions, then the category automatically comes up, right? So is it just fully outsourced CROs or not? Or is it something that, depending on the size of organization, you need to go functional? So, but I think data sometimes, even though we're a data driven or industry for the clinical trial side, sometimes in the operation side, we lack that kind of backbone to kind of drive us to kind of really, do we really need category management? And I think that's a big, you know, there are some small organizations that do need category management because it needs to be very focused. So it's not so much about the size of the company, but what's important to the company. You know, is team dynamics, does that become something that you need to put in your category as observation? So for me, it's always been about, let's start very granular. Sometimes in smaller organizations, you don't have the data, so you have to get a partner to really help you to drive that from a technology perspective. But I think once you start looking at what actually is happening and driving some of those categories based on the importance of your portfolio, that's when you really have the stakeholders, back to Kara's point, really pay attention to what matters to that organization. So that's been very helpful for me in every organization. And I'm going through that journey right now of like what really matters to our portfolio.
Absolutely. And actually, we've done some analytics ourselves. We looked at how much CRO is charging for vendor management at the project level. And the numbers are quite high. It's a fairly large percentage, as much as 20% out of the total project management cost is associated with vendor management. But if you aggregate it, talking about the numbers, and you already have a sizable portfolio with CRO X, charging these at the study level, although they may be managing the same vendors, it does make a lot of good sense to question how they do it or to justify internally establishing your own team. And how challenging is that, Rob, from even a change management perspective? And I know you also spoke about sourcing and category management strategy combined, or how do they differ? I know you have vast experience in this field.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, jumping back, I've got to say I completely agree with everything that people are saying there, and taking this category strategy down to the most simple level is where you sort of move between tactical and strategic sourcing. And someone described to me very clearly once, it's like, what do I want from the market? What can the market provide? How do I join the two? And that's fundamentally the key point. And it goes back to, what do I need? The key aspect of, particularly from a strategic to category movement, is assessing the needs of that company and knowing when those boundaries change. I mean, to steal an analogy from Scott, and thinking about children and child rearing, etc., is understanding boundaries and giving boundaries to the kids and changing those boundaries as they get older so that they can work within them. So that's a very similar thing as the company grows, and bringing your teams, and more importantly your stakeholders and your internal customers along with you on that particular journey, and letting them, explaining why, one, you don't take a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and do you apply these things appropriately? Is it the right time to move from ultimately full service outsourcing and going to a single CRO is a category management? It's just a very wide category, and making sure that you then don't segment the market too much that you lose vision and you lose the alignment and adjoinment within that space. But have some realistic, if you're talking about vendor management and you're putting it that all there, that's a cost. That's fine. You could take some of that cost on board yourself, but it's still a cost, and you just got to work out what is the most appropriate for me in this space. And then explaining it correctly through either benchmarks or application of internal cost versus what you're spending externally to your stakeholders to make those best decisions.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to change the topic now, but it's related. I'm going to get you to discuss more the onboarding, the vendor capability evaluation for new vendors. And we know that sometimes companies that establish category strategies, they tend to become very restrictive. Because they've gone through the pain of sending RFIs to I don't know how many vendors. They narrow down to 3. They spend hours in due diligence, and they don't want to do it again to get to a 4th vendor. So that can suffocate innovation in certain cases, and it's a difficult balance to achieve. I was actually looking at some numbers coming from different sources. More than 400,000 RFIs are sent per year. The cost of estimated cost of a business evaluation exercise could be as high as 150,000 per evaluation. And we also did a survey similar to the one that we have open now to the audience, in which we asked the sponsor, what is the percentage of the answers that you send in an RFI are you reading? And the percentage is more like 15%. Yet the service providers are making a lot of effort answering, and sometimes not getting feedback of why they haven't been selected in that coveted category preferred bucket. So several questions opening to the audience. Are you surprised by the numbers being so high? What can we do as an industry to maintain the nimbleness and flexibility versus becoming too restrictive? And what do you think we could do better balancing the need to do extensive onboarding and qualification versus that becoming a real burden to the organization? So I'm going to start from the opposite corner. So Brenda, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Anca. I'm going to get a little bit detailed, but I think the biggest pain point for me in terms of evaluation is just the initial stage of receiving, right? You get 16 different ways of answering the same question. So I strongly feel that at some point the industry needs to come to a standard way of doing this. You know, Avoca has done all of this work around, you know, really standardizing some of these things from other perspectives, operations. I really feel strongly that as an industry, we need to get more efficient about doing that. You know, project management is project management, and that's probably categorized 16 different ways by all the CROs, right? So, you know, for us, it's a waste of time. So I think it's that piece. I know it's a little bit detailed, but it's probably, as a number you quoted, one of the biggest pieces of that, right? That we all spend time kind of trying to understand the service. Does the service match what the protocol is asking for? Or does the service match what the program is asking for? So that initial step of confirming that the vendor or the sponsor has translated the design or the protocol needs correctly is an enormous inefficient process. So for me, it's a call out for everyone to really think about that piece. You know, I know there are ongoing efforts to standardize, but I don't think we've ever taken it really serious as an industry to really do that, because there is a lot of efficiency in that step. So that's more about, it's a little bit granular, but for me, that's, once we get through that, I think we could become really more efficient.
I think you are speaking to the choir in this panel, because all of us feel strongly about standardization. Is it, Rob?
Well, I mean, it's throughout our industry, and it's been adding cost over and over again. I mean, let's look at the conversation we have about sites, for example. I mean, I know I'm going a little bit off topic here, but the ways that we engage with our sites and we apply technology. And I think last year at the PCMG we talked about this, and I think someone talked about opening a cupboard in a site and finding a stack of tablets this tall, where people are all saying, here, you've got to use my technology. And it's the same thing. It's adding cost, it's adding waste. And the same thing happens here. Out of those many questions that people ask, what are you actually going to differentiate between these suppliers on? And if there's no way of differentiating between them, don't ask the question. It's just literally a waste of their time. It's a waste of your time. But this again goes back to very similarly the conversation that we were having in the last question, getting your internal customers to articulate what they need and how one will differentiate from the other. And you ask those questions from the start. You build those into your process and you keep them to a minimum, because the truth is, well, as you say, 15% of the questions are actually read, they will probably only make a decision based on 5-6 questions, that actually, so why ask all the others if they're going to be the same? Or you keep it there. This is particularly important as we go into a world with whole new legislations that we need to be taking account of. I know we're not going to go down the GXP alignment, but there's been, GDPR, there's looking at NIS2, there's, stuff going on about biosecure. There's all sorts of new legislation that are happening that we do need to be asking about, that we don't yet know. So all those questions we've asked a myriad of times, gather them together and work out, that we can just demonstrate that, yes, they can do that job. But then to make that selection, keep it as small as possible and then focus on the new things.
Absolutely. Kara, you are probably doing a fair amount of RFIs and vendor evaluation at Dragonfly, probably now. What's your perspective on the process? Is it easy? Is it cumbersome? Is it a lot of materials to read? Do you agree even with the 15% being read? Or do you think the process that really adds value? Or is it something that we are checking the box?
Yeah, and again, I kind of go back to the statement that it really depends on the organization you're in, right? And I think where I'm at right now in Dragonfly, and procurement is a new function. So, overseeing the procurement for the enterprise of Dragonfly, there's a lot of different services we're covering and a lot of different requirements that we're thinking about. And so, to Brenda and Rob's point so far, is that we really have to engage up front. And that has to be not only just the business operational stakeholders, but I've also found it's really important to engage with your support functions like IT or quality and groups like that, so you could build some of those more relevant, meaningful questions into the RFI, RFP. So that way, when you get to the end of the process, you're making a decision based on a holistic view from the organization and not just the people who have to implement this from an operational standpoint. And so, you know, I've seen it fail before where we don't do that. And at the end, we select a vendor who we are not compatible with from an IT perspective or from a GDPR perspective, right? And that can be a real challenge on what do we do now? And so all of that wastage, to Rob's point, up to that point of the time and effort of teams to review these responses, the vendors to provide these responses, I think you do have to engage at the right level to make sure that your RFI, RFP is fit for purpose, especially in smaller organizations as you build out your vendor pool and repertoire. So.
Absolutely. It's finding that relevant question, also hurting the cats, because sometimes there are multiple groups sending surveys. Quality sends a survey, IT sends a survey. One is in SurveyMonkey, one is in Excel, one is in Word. You know, they're not always, it's not always easy to even respond. And I say that from a service provider perspective. So it's quite challenging. Scott, what's your experience? How difficult is to herd the cats here in terms of getting through an evaluation like this from an internal stakeholder perspective?
I don't want to repeat what everyone else said. I mean, I think I align. I think we need to simplify. We need to standardize. A lot of the time it is checking the box because that's what the organization wants and said so. But Rob was spot on to say 5, maybe 10 questions at the end of the day is what we're looking at. Well, send that out. That's a 5-minute exercise to send it out, and then have how many providers are you looking at? 3, 5, 6, 7, maybe, whittling it down to 1 or 2, and then selecting 1 or maybe 2, depending on, you know, what your organization's looking for. But yeah, we definitely need to simplify. We definitely need to standardize. And I know there's some companies out there that have started to try to do this. And again, God didn't cure world hunger overnight. I think this is a start, and I'm sure there's several other companies that are going to evolve over this and have that similar service.
Thank you so much, Scott. And now I'd like to take a break from our discussion and engage the audience. Karen, can you help me? We have 2 questions, which you'll also find in our survey in a slightly modified version, but we are trying to get more engagement from our audience. And since we cannot speak to you directly, hopefully the polls will get the temperature of your thinking. Karen, can you help us drive the 2 survey questions?
Sure, absolutely. So just want to let everybody know. So I'm going to launch the first survey. So the poll is now open, and what this one is asking is, what tool set do you use for outsourcing, either tactical or preferred vendor, non-RFP? And your choices are Excel trackers, a homegrown system, a generic system that's been customized for clinical, or a generic system that's out of the box, or consultants, i.e. outsourcing. So I see that people are starting to vote. This is awesome. I know, I guess you guys can't see it right now, right, Anca? So we'll
wait for the poll to close.
All right. I get to watch it just ahead of time, just so you know. But so I do see everybody's votes coming in. So thank you guys. Keep going. I'm going to keep it open for a little bit longer. So if you haven't voted, make your selection. I will give it about 10 more seconds. I think it seems to have kind of stabilized in terms of what we're doing. All right, let me close the poll, and I will share the results. Can you guys see the results?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
All right.
May I ask the panelists to comment? Are you surprised by this? Is it what you were thinking?
No, I mean, it's Excel and Word is the common way of going, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm interested to see 17% of a homegrown system, but yeah, I'm not surprised that 50% is Excel Word.
Okay. Any other comments?
I thought it would be higher, Excel and Word, but I'm not surprised either.
Okay, well, this is the challenge we are trying to solve in terms of bringing more fit for purpose, because if you look, generic system customized for clinical, it's only 8%. And we know why. It's because generic systems are not made for clinical, and customization is very expensive. So although we all need a generic system, it does not exclude in any way having more than one system operating in sync. Any other comments?
I guess, Anca, it's Brenda. It just, back to my comment originally is that, in order for us to get to a standardization level, some of this automation has to be referenced backwards, right? So all this Excel and Word sits somewhere in someone's either shared drive or, so I think that's the hurdle that doesn't let us get to that efficiency level.
Absolutely. Shall we get to the next survey question?
Sure, absolutely. So now that you've told us what system you're using, we're interested in why you're using this particular system. So your choices are, because it's legacy, that's what it's always been there. You got there, everybody used it, you're using the same thing. And lack of resources, you don't have the ability to change things or people to do additional things. Nothing in the budget. So that's a pretty obvious one. You didn't know that there was anything better. This is what you've always used, and there you go. Or in some cases, it can be dictated by another group. So I'll give you a few seconds to make your selections. And then we will show you the results. So let's see, they're all coming in. Let's get a few more in there. Let's see what people are saying here. All right, you have about 10 more seconds to make your opinion known. And then I'm sending you back to your panelists. All right, so I'm going to close the poll now, since it seems to have stabilized here. And I will show you guys the results. Here you go.
Okay, I thought it would be more dictated by another group. But we've always worked this way. Rob, why is that the case? Because we do a lot, we're trying so hard to foster change management. And still people have always worked a certain way, and
I think some of these are
they don't change direction.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is linked. I mean, because it's like we work this way, people are working flat out and very busy. It's very hard to find time to make those changes, make those assessments, etc. I think I likewise am surprised that dictated by another group isn't higher, but I don't know exactly what the makeup of the attendees are in terms of the company types and sizes, and I think you'll find a difference in some of the larger organizations compared to the smaller, where you get clinical sourcing part of a wider procurement group. So yeah, it's an interesting response. I guess I'm not massively surprised, apart from the dictated by another group area. But yeah, it works. It's a mechanism. I don't understand. The process change is difficult in our organizations and in our industry. We're very happy to take risks in so many different ways on the science. I mean, a 10,000 to 1 ratio of products at the top to 1 on the market shouldn't be sustainable. But yet we take those risks and we push it out when it comes to the science. But yet we don't seem to be able to take those risks when it comes to process and changing the way that we work.
Absolutely. Thoughts from the panelists? Brenda, Scott, Kara.
Yeah, so I agree. It's the lack of innovation in this space, right? So, I think there is a wealth of availability of things that you can do. Now in the industry, there's a couple of organizations building things and doing things differently, but I think it's just heads down. The outsourcing organizations usually are tackling a timeline that they should have started 6 months before to select the vendor. So we're continuing to do just heads down, getting these evaluations on the moving forward, where there's not enough time for the innovation or budget for that innovation. And at least in my groups, they've always asked me, how could you shorten this time? And this is a clear answer of that. So I think it's just the innovation there's no space for it in terms of resource allocation for innovation.
Yeah, this is Kara. I agree with Brenda. I think points both Rob and Brenda raised, right? One, like, I think our industry is just adverse to changing the status quo because fear and risk of potential timeline delays, things not working right and setting you back so far. And I think, yeah, it's allocating time to implement thoughtfully such a solution. And so it's being able to kind of engage ahead of time and strategically think about how can this system help? So almost like taking that category approach of like engaging with stakeholders and kind of sharing, this is what we're trying to do, recognizing that this is an outsourcing procurement decision, but, you know, kind of sharing and trying to find a pilot or a co-champion to implement such a system.
And
Yeah,
I'm
and
going
in
to go back.
general, they're related, right? In the sense that if you don't have resources, the chicken and the egg. If you don't have resources, then you are so busy following the legacy that you don't have time to implement solutions that would make your work easier. So that goes the spinning wheel. It's I don't have time, but then I'm buried in work, and we spend hours doing due diligence that could be automated or other aspects of it. Sorry, Scott.
No, I was just going to say to close this out was, I'll go back to what my original comment was. In the biotech startup sponsor world, this is a nice to have, right? And it's dictated by budget. It's like, well, we can't budget. I don't know how much these systems are going to cost. Let's say a couple $100,000, right? They just don't have the money to do that. Whereas when you get to the larger companies where the volume, they have to cut back resources, right? Because they're on a cost savings initiative, and they might say, we could spend that couple of $100,000 because it might eliminate 3 or 4, FTEs. And at the end of the day, return of investment, we're going to save $100,000 by doing that. If I have to just throw some basic numbers out, so I'm surprised the budget piece is 0% in this. But again, Kara said it too. Fit for purpose. What is it that your company's looking to do? But again, I think there definitely is room for improvement and to streamline things moving forward.
Absolutely, it's a mindset issue too. Yes.
So, we have a comment from the audience. Now we do have some questions, but we'll throw those in at the end. Just as a comment, the lack of resources is compounded because of the complexity of, if I can read this, because of the complexity of for the complexity to change into a tool and the lack of focus in organizations to invest in non-critical systems. So that's kind of, for functional support systems means the cost of change is prohibitive. So that was a comment from the audience. So
I think the key to that answer is you have to play into what the teams care about, which is time usually. So if you put in something that's going to automate or make you accelerate the RFP process, that ultimately turns into time earned and time used for the running of the clinical trial. So I think it's all about, again, putting the time to really understand what the efficiency gain is when you do look at these things. And I know more than anybody that this is a side job. It's not like this is this isn't on top of getting all those RFPs done and the evaluation done. But ultimately, you will save time on both sides.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in on that as well, because I don't think people really draw the causal link between poor planning and then the poor process for vendor selection and poor performance later on down the line. It's overlooked significantly by not accurately articulating need, by scoping out correctly, by capturing that in your contract in a way that you can then both parties fully understand what it is that you're actually being asked to do and asking to do, and how that relates to to cost has a knock-on effect on overall relationships between the business to business and the performance you get. You know, and it's a perfect example of the 110-100 rule of you know, cost of avoidance versus cost of fixing versus cost of failure.
Absolutely, and we are seeing this. It's a mindset change as well. We oftentimes work with very tiny biotechs that have just one RFP, but if, you know, and if they are successful, they may have the second one, but there is no guarantee that there will be a second one. But they are understanding the need of having as a tool set from the beginning the ability to plan like a big pharma, the ability to source and negotiate with the CRO as a larger organization would. And oftentimes they don't even have a sourcing organization, but they can use technology to be their superpowered sourcing group, and they end up consistently saving. And that is, again, it's a way of thinking about the journey. And sometimes, you know, the journey can be short. Maybe the drug is not successful. But if the company is successful and you are building from the beginning a sourcing department with technology, and most of the time there is no sourcing department, it's cleanups with technology, you are building the foundation of expanding and growing in the future. Maybe we can go back to looking at each other, Karen.
Yep, absolutely. Let me figure. Hold on, I lost my polling thing. Oops. There you go.
Okay. So very quickly on the next topic is about performance management and governance. That usually also tends to come later in the game because the further you are on the clinical trial journey, you start thinking about inspection readiness, or you start enlarging your portfolio and you are paying more and more attention to the vendor performance than you would when you have just one study starting. We did the survey, which is also provided with the webinar in 2020, and we asked the question, who's prepared your governance materials? We asked the sponsor. And I believe more than 90%, I don't know the exact number, said the CRO is doing it. And if you ask the CRO, that's pretty much the same thing. Do you think that sponsors should be preparing governance materials? And you know, if the CRO does it, then you have 3 different CROs, let's say, because you implemented some slick category management strategy, then CRO X looks different than Y, looks different than Z. Not so easy to compare, not let alone trend data over time, because usually the KPIs come in PDF in a PowerPoint, or the dashboards are just not easy to manage. So what's your perspective? Should sponsors have more control? Should sponsor be doing the governance materials? Or if they do the CROs, if the CROs are doing it, what can we do to make it more efficient or more comparable or more amenable to analytics? I'm going to start with you, Rob.
Oh, okay. No, Scott was going to jump in, but I'll keep it short.
That.
I'll keep it nice and quick, Scott. Look, we talk about partnerships, and this is ultimately, you know, goes back to what we started off before. You know, what do we want? What can they provide? How do we get them? How do we join the two? But a partnership should be, you know, jointly working. So, you know, what do you measure depends on this. You know, how you report it depends on the source. You know, and an agreement on what we're trying to achieve. Now, you know, there's financial measures, there's performance measures, there's, you know, incidents and accidents, and all sorts of things in between. If you put the burden on the CROs, they might be the best. They've got the data to be able to provide that. Then yes, absolutely, put it there, but realize you'll pay for it. So it should be a shared exercise, you know, to make sure it works. Because a lot of the times it can become box ticking exercises again. You know, we had a governance meeting. We have to because we want to demonstrate oversight. So I've seen them done badly. I've seen them done very well. You know, some companies do it very, very well, and have that true dialogue. But it can be another opportunity to look for fault, to point out fault. You know, we unfortunately live in an industry which is still dominated by a very master-servant relationship dynamic between the the players, which is detrimental, and we need to get over that. And governance could be another time of Big Brother's going to come in and point out where you've got things wrong, and that shouldn't be the case.
Brenda, I know this is a subject dear to your heart.
Yes, so I think Kara is going to comment some of this, but I think that the most efficient I've ever implemented this governance structure is when the data from an oversight perspective, meaning like the team is getting joint data. So it's coming in from the CRO, they're utilizing it to really make sure that they're talking the same language. And it's being effectively used, not blaming, not this, but really like, okay, what is the issues we're having at the site? What are the mitigations? And here's the data that supports that. Then that rolls up into management, and then that rolls up into governance. That's truly where I've seen this be effective. And it's really a joint effort. Yes, we are getting the data from the CRO. You know very well, I'm going through that journey right now. It's not an easy process, right? And we are gathering the data and making sure that we analyze it and make sure that the study team itself is utilizing it to the benefit of their performance. I think that's key so that they can then have those conversations, and then that could roll up to a governance level. So that's how it's worked really well for me. You and I worked on some of that together, and it was effective. And the collaboration of the two teams and the two organizations really made it more powerful of collaboration. Yes, there were always issues. There were always things that we could tackle, but we were always tackling with a collaborative measure. So I've definitely felt the good and bad of this governance and oversight. But if you don't bring the benefit to the study team, to the leadership level, and to the governance level, then the relationship falls apart, and it does become, you know, there's mistakes, right? Like people make mistakes in gathering the data, but it should really be about utilizing the data to run the study and the program smoothly as a collaborative nature.
Absolutely, it's trust and verify within a healthy relationship, because the sponsor is sometimes to blame too. So, Kara, how you're doing this for a very, very long time. What's your perspective? How can we make governance better? Maybe simpler, more effective. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get to simple, but I think the goal is for effective, right? And I think this is something I'm so passionate about. And I just feel like, you know, your smaller organizations, your biotech organizations, because of the resource bandwidth and limitations, right? I think there's this desire to kind of chuck things over the fence once we contract. And I think it's our responsibility in the roles we're in as panelists, right? Like procurement, outsourcing, whatever it may be, to really like reinforce and build this muscle, right? I think sometimes like I feel so disappointed at like how quickly the business can go to the finger pointing mentality, and it never gets us where we need to be. And so I think that it's our role to really help these teams see that and understand what it looks like and how do we do it effectively. Because I just feel like that oversight is such a critical component of what we need to achieve in order for like the cost of switching a vendor is so high, right? Like just from a resource standpoint, dollars and cents of running efforts, right? Like rebuilding those relationships and like understanding ways of working. So we really need to invest the time up front to make sure we're setting both sides up for success. So, and that's to Brenda's point, that comes in from oversight, which rolls up into governance, and thinking about governance. Is it, you know, what kind of culture do you have in your organization? Is it one of, you know, the leadership really empowers the operational teams to deliver? And so that's where I see like that roll up come from, right? Whereas like, are we in larger organizations where that strategic objectives are being set and it's on the operational teams to deliver? And that's more that trickle down approach. So just some different thoughts there.
Absolutely. And that strategic alignment oftentimes doesn't happen, which goes from somewhat degrades the governance into being a finger pointing exercise. Scott, what's your experience? You still need governance in a small organization as much as you need in a large.
Yeah. So
how do you deal with it?
Well, when we talk about governance, there's different types of meetings, right? You have your, from the top of the pyramid, the executive steering or joint steering committee meetings. That, in my opinion, is a joint effort, right? You have this, you're not going to be talking about what happened at site 1, 2, 3 in Madrid, for example, right? you're going to be talking about more trends and things like that. But that's a two-way process too, because if we are talking about a relationship and a partnership, I think the biotech and the sponsor needs to also present what is happening on our end of the business, right? Yeah. What is new? What are the trends? What's in the portfolio? What's hot? What's coming down the pipe? Things like that. That's a joint effort. The next series of meetings in governance is operational oversight, or a quarterly operations meeting. Now, depending on what's being outsourced to the CRO, that might be one way. If you're doing a full service model with the CRO, what is it that the sponsor can give to those slides, other than knowing who your audience is, and they may need to kind of massage some of the stuff that the CRO presented out, depending on who the audience is and looking. Now, if you're only outsourcing, if it's a partially outsourcing, or it's a hybrid model and things like that, I think there's a lot of room for it to be joint. And then you have your monthly project team meetings, that should definitely be collaborative. I don't think that should be a one-way street from the CRO presenting back to it. So I guess what I'm saying is, in all instances, it should be joint. But again, depending on what type of outsourcing model you have, it might be one way with the CRO, presenting and preparing those slides, on their own.
Rob, what's your perspective? I think establishing a sound oversight early on, you don't have to be a large organization to do it. I think it's paramount. Again, you may fail or succeed and become a large biotech or shut down, but having that early on is important. How are you advising your clients, for example, to get started and not think about it, hey, when it's too late?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take task with something you said earlier on about inspection readiness not being important when you're doing one study. It's vital from the start, and you can't go back and change it. So make sure you build that in. But that's on a different topic altogether. I think there's an awful lot advising clients about, one, we always talk about the the client of choice and this kind of thing. Actually, trying to be the sponsor of choice, and changing it, and being that that voice for change. I think, Kara, you were talking about it very nicely as well, and bringing your teams along. And Brenda, you mentioned it too. I was talking to somebody just this very morning, and he was talking about being in a conflict situation with. There was an issue going on with the vendor, and he was trying to see it from the vendor's perspective, at which point a very senior member in the company said, remember who you work for. That's wrong. Actually, you're trying to get to an ultimate goal, which is delivery of this study and this portfolio, and these people in this company are helping you do that. So this is a role within the sourcing function, which is very, very important, and be that voice, the advocate for collaboration. And that's the point. Throughout the various levels of governance and discussion, depending on whatever it is, as long as it's correctly scoped out about talking about the right things and not having, as rightly Scott, but you say at this level, you don't talk about site 1, 2, 3 in Madrid, but how many times have you been involved in that meeting where those things do come up, at that kind of level? And this is the problem, and stopping people from having that. So focusing the discussions on things that are actually going to make a difference. Right back to where we started in terms of the RFI, only ask questions that actually make a difference. Only measure things that are actually going to make you act differently. Otherwise it is just pure noise. And I think some of the numbers that you found was eye-watering. And I don't know how it went in governance, but I think in the RFI, RFP, I think you found somewhere between 10 to 25, and that's a big error bars, but 10 to 25 billion dollars cost. Yeah. 25 billion dollars of cost on this process. No, so I don't know what they are in governance. So again, we're in a perfect storm of where things are going, and I know we'll talk about it future, but we've only got a short time. Perfect storm of cost of going up, and future revenues being pushed down. We look at what's going on with the IRA and other legislation around the world and capping of costs. So we as a group have a moral obligation to reduce the amount of cost for developing a drug, so we can get more drugs to the market more rapidly. So we've got to find new ways of doing things, and we've got to work together in order to achieve it.
Which leads perfectly to the last topic, and I know we don't have a lot of time. What's in it for the future? Many ways to solve the current pain points, and I think we all agree that the cost of business management, it's high, as much as we are trying to recruit patients faster and put DCTs in place, you could be spending months in CTA negotiations on a change order negotiation, or not being alerted to the right risk. So all the things that relate more not to the execution of the trial, but to the business operations and the infrastructure side of the trials. So what should we do to equip ourselves for the future? Broadly, I'll start with you, Scott.
I was going to jump in this time, but go
Yeah,
you.
I recently chaired the 8th annual Procurement and Sourcing Summit meeting in Boston last week. And AI, I know everyone's talking about AI, but there is a potential in AI to automate some of these things, especially when you're doing contract negotiations with MSAs. Is it going to replace the human element? No, but it will take some of this subjective thinking and expedite some of the timing of it. Leading into that meeting last week, there was an interview with the Microsoft CEO and said, where are we in general with AI, not specific to R&D or drug development? And he said, I'm going to go back to my analogy in the beginning, we are in 2nd grade. That's where AI is right now in the continuum of it. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to utilize the technologies that these companies are having out there as it relates specifically to what we've been talking about here this past hour.
Oh, absolutely. And just to give you an idea what AI can do, we calculated there are some 8 million combinations of bit grid mapping out there in the industry between some 1,500 service providers and 5,000 pharma companies. But you can use AI to do the bit grid mapping literally in seconds. I will leave you with that just as an application, even if you are 2nd grade, but it does need additional oversight, but it's such a major efficiency and accuracy change that it's just right in front of us. I know, Rob, you wanted to go and I cut you off, so you go next.
No, that's fine. I think, there's absolutely technology, there's complexity of trials, but I think we need to relook at the way that we actually approach outsourcing. I think that we've been doing full service outsourcing, FSP, in-house partnerships, going round and round and round. I do not think that they will work for us. We need to learn from other industries, like we've been talking about, Anca, and we've been, some of the things that we've been looking at from IT industry, from construction and others as well. There are things that they have been doing for the last 20 years, which added 40% efficiencies to either 40% quicker or 40% less resources. We've been lagging behind for too long.
Yeah, and simplify. Hey, we made our life impossible. So isn't it, Brenda? We could do things faster by just starting by doing it simpler.
Yep, simplification. I will say something about technology. I think that technology has been an improvement to the industry, but I also want to say that you have to trust the technology vendor to give you what you really need, but it is a collaboration to make sure that what you are buying and what you're expecting, and because there's so much innovation, that you have some appetite for some of the workings together. So I think Absolutely. As a collaboration in the industry, we have to be open to not being perfect too.
Absolutely. Kara, you're ending the panel here with a final thought.
Yeah. I don't know if it will be anything quote worthy, but I think that the perspective I would share here is that as we think about small teams and how do we deliver, like I'm always focused and concerned about my team and I delivering an ROI, right? The investment that the company is making in me and the effort we're putting forth and reviewing all these things, am I doing that? And I think one of the areas that I'd love to see technology help us in the future and more steadily is what are the trends I'm not observing, right? Like we come from training and understanding what we should be looking at, what we need to look at, but what are the other areas that are maybe impactful to what I'm setting up and negotiating around that I haven't noticed, right? And so I think that would be a really interesting area to move forward with too.
Absolutely. Just making procurement powerful and sexy again. So outsourcing is not about gatekeeping. It's about enabling decision making, and viewed in this way should be an area to invest in. We'll take some questions from the audience. Karen, are there any questions from the audience?
Sure. Let me throw out this first one. It says evaluating vendors up front through questionnaires is all well and good, but I feel I still have to micromanage them. What is the best way to monitor performance during the trial to ensure we get the desired outcomes?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off with that if it's okay. I think that from my perspective, it's that establishment up front of what the expectations are. And so this comes around like good definition of what is the scope that I'm sending out. And then working with the teams to understand what does delivery look like, what does good look like, and defining that through metrics, KPIs, you know, even just qualitative aspects that you're looking for that vendor to share regular updates on with you. And I think that establishing that framework up front gives the team something easy to manage, and it also aligns the vendors with what they need to deliver.
If I could add to Kara, I think it needs to become part of their everyday work. So those KPIs and performance measurement need to be part of an automatic conversation and need to drive the delivery. And then that then eventually gets to that ability to not micromanage, because you'll see that sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it's the vendor's fault, but you could work through the root cause of what matters, because sometimes we get caught up in what doesn't matter. So.
Yep, and I'll add up to that as well. I mean, I've seen examples where people they spend more time measuring than doing, because we're putting so many different new things in their path, you know. And this idea, people say, I want more control. Actually, they're doing is putting new levels of scrutiny on top. So, you know, and it comes back to the trust mentality, you know, and where you go into on that particular continuum. I know it's difficult because this has been many years of this kind of working relationship, or, you know, a perceived failure to deliver or real failure to deliver, etc. You know, so that application could actually just make it worse into a death spiral. You know, you spend all the time. I had this team who basically said, I want to report every 24 hours on what's gone on X, Y, and Z, and it took them, you know, 6 hours of the working day to prepare the report and only 2 hours to do it. So, you know, what are you actually achieving by this? So we think we're taking greater control and forcing them to do more, but actually what we're doing is getting in their way. So it's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. Actually, when we did a survey, not this one, but we did a survey on the CROs in, I believe, 2021, Karen, or 22, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Asked CRO, what is the reason, or what are the reasons that leads to micromanagement and that challenges in the CRO, in the sponsor CRO relationship? And the number one answer, I don't remember the percentage, was the poor quality of the RFP. And, you know, when you throw a protocol over the fence and you say, hey, you have exactly 2 weeks to come up with a whole strategy and budget, but I'm giving you like the minimal, you guess the number of pages, you guess the number of slides, you do, and then you will do whatever you can in those 2 weeks. But it's just set a misalignment up front. So it goes to how solid the RFP process is. If sponsor is more clear, if you align clearer at the beginning, then maybe you don't need to micromanage so much down the line.
Which goes back to the point I made before. Yeah, poor scoping, you know, poor performance is linked to poor planning.
Yeah. And half the time our protocols are not complete, right? Most amendments come right after. So that whole concept is really real.
Yeah, and you oftentimes, the sponsor doesn't allow the CRO to review the protocol as part of the scope of work. It's like you give the protocol and say, execute on it. So the many issues that we can talk about, but it's that's one of the reasons why it becomes challenging down the road.
Okay, we have one more question. Looks like the audience is still fairly engaged, so we'll just go through this one last question. If you guys can answer it quickly, and then you can feel free to end it. Okay.
Okay.
So when we are looking to onboard new vendors in niche areas where we do not have experience, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We might not ask all of the right questions. What's the best way to ensure we're evaluating them properly?
Use your network. Ask people who know. I mean, this is a particularly, I mean, it's interesting coming on the back of the discussion around AI and technology. I mean, I think this is very, very key. You know, we've all worked, you know, if you want me to assess a clinical vendor, absolutely fine. If you want the data management, we've been doing this for years. ePro, eCo, as we got to know it better, certain labs, biomarkers, etc. But there's this explosion in technology arenas. And yeah, particularly in terms as well of assessing return on investment is very, very key, because there's, you know, the right questions to ask. Is this the right company to go to? I mean, I always talk about, you know, for shows my age, VHS versus Betamax, you know, and who's going to be the winner on this one? So that's where you use the network. You reach out, you know, and of course I'll say this, you know, come to a consultancy, you know, group who've got resources to do those kind of assessments for you, and can provide advice that go beyond just clinical and the arena of maybe our own industry, because these things are different, you know, and you do that due diligence, because otherwise you get into analysis paralysis, or this just do nothing, you know. I can't make a decision, so I'm going to make no decision. It goes back to some of the points we made before. But, you know, plug into the right network, use, you know, industry groups. Feel free to give, I suppose, any of the panelists here a call, you know, and say, you know, what do we know? And if we can't answer it, then we might know people who can.
I'm going to take the question a little different. So where I struggle to measure is where we go into new therapeutic areas, rare disease, new technology in medicine, and we select a CRO. That's really difficult. And that is a really hard challenge when you're going into a rare disease space that has never ever been, you know, explored. So those are really hard things to measure, but what's been successful for me and my organization, different organizations, is to have that transparency be upfront and to do a measure around risk. And then there is a risk and a bonus aspect to this, right? So if you commit to this, then this is the win. If you don't, this is the loss. So you want to start, you're hiring them, the CRO or the vendor, because they have expertise and you feel like they're the best, but you do have to put some measures in place around the risk when you are going into unchallenged, not the things that don't have, you know, think about cell therapy, think about gene therapy. All of those things are all kind of things that you have to operate differently. So does anybody really have full experience? Maybe yes, maybe no. So I think there is something to say about new areas and new therapeutic areas and new mechanisms of running studies. But I think a relationship with your CRO vendors to be very transparent about that as well on both sides and put some measurement around that. I think that's the way to go, instead of micromanaging either side that don't know what really needs to be done to get it done.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The only thing I would add to that, Anca, it's just a really quick statement, is when you think about your network, when you think about engaging, don't be afraid to engage from all different sorts of views, right? So not just like other sponsors, but also the vendor side, right? Like you can definitely engage with the vendors and due diligence and asking like, what's important? What do I need to think about? And they'll be honest, they'll share that with you, I think.
Yeah, actually, you're making a great point. Asking the vendor, what should I ask you? It's not necessarily putting bias into the process. And there are resources out there. There's Diligent Pharma, there is MCC, there is Avoca. Even we have 800 some questions in Clinical Master you can use for inspiration. It's not meant to ask them all. And marrying maybe technology with consultancy and domain expertise. PCMG is a resource as well. Can help expedite the process. Well, we've got 10 minutes over. I know people have meetings, so I'm so very grateful for you joining the panel, for the audience staying with us, and we'll do this again. And please let us know what you think. You have feedback, you can score us. And again, thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. I think we can go on for hours and hours, and we can't do it in this format, but conversation can go on in the background.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank
All
you.
right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.